Hey guys, tonight we're plunging straight into one of history's weirdest, most disturbing episodes. The Victorian-era obsession with breeding, but not dogs or horses or especially talented carrier pigeons. Nope. Tonight's bedtime story is about Victorian women being literally sold for breeding purposes. That's right, tonight we're mixing the sleep-inducing charm of a cozy bedtime story with the existential horror of 19th century gender economics. Fun, right? Before we get started, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this sort of late-night insanity. Drop a comment telling me what year you think you'd last in the past, and what era would sell you at auction. I'm calling dibs on slightly used Renaissance librarian. Dim those lights, crank up a fan for that comforting Victorian orphanage in a wind tunnel ambience, and settle in. Maybe bundle up extra tight. Tonight's story is colder than the heart of a Victorian matchmaker. Now, let me ask, have you ever wondered what would happen if Tinder met a livestock auction? Did you know women could be advertised for sturdy hips and good teeth? How did the Victorian version of swiping right work if your entire fate was decided by your uncle's bar tab? Did being considered a prime specimen mean you got extra porridge, or just a longer list of chores? Would you have survived the weekly wife sale at the town market, or would you get traded in for 2 sheep and a sturdy umbrella? And most importantly, how many times could a Victorian woman hear the phrase, "good childbearing stock," before simply faking her own death and living in a hedge? Congratulations, you've just woken up in the heart of Victorian England. The year is 1851. You're wearing a wool dress that weighs more than your average toddler. Your father is eyeing your ankles with concern for the family fortune. And somewhere, an auctioneer is warming up his voice. Welcome to the utterly bonkers world of Victorian marriage markets, where women, for a brief, horrifying stretch of time, were literally sold for breeding purposes. Don't worry, it only gets stranger from here. You open your eyes to a chill in the air, and the subtle sound of an auctioneer's bell ringing somewhere in the distance. Welcome to Victorian England, where your first waking thought isn't about coffee, but whether you'll end the day as someone's prime broodmare or get a bonus for particularly shapely earlobes. Congratulations! You have been born at the very peak of Victorian social engineering, a time when the world was rapidly modernizing, except when it came to your basic human rights. The first thing you notice isn't your hard mattress or the fact that you're sleeping under a quilt heavier than most relationships. It's the parade of sounds and smells drifting through your thin window. Carts clatter over cobblestones. A milkmaid shouts a greeting you're pretty sure is an insult, and someone is already arguing about the price of turnips. In the distance, that bell rings again. A sharp, metallic clang with a hint of impending life upheaval. You stretch carefully. The corset you slept in, for training purposes of course, leaves you feeling like a well-wrapped pork roast. Your hair is braided so tight your ancestors can feel it, and your feet dangle off the edge of a bed that was probably considered an antique when Queen Victoria was still teething. You rub your eyes, hoping this is all a bad dream. But you're immediately assaulted by the realization that today might be market day. That means crowds. That means scrutiny. That means, if your family is particularly ambitious, you'll be presented like a nervous chicken at the county fair. Breakfast is a bowl of tepid porridge. But you don't have much of an appetite. Not when your mother is already sizing you up like a side of beef at a butcher's convention. Stand up straight, dear. Smile, but not too much. Show them you've still got all your teeth. You nod, wondering if there's a polite way to fake the flu for the next 6 years. The only thing more terrifying than being inspected by strangers is the idea that you might end up going unsold, doomed to a life of spinsterhood and perpetual embroidery. Outside, the town is already bustling. The air is sharp with the mingled scents of horse, sweat, cheap soap, and the subtle terror of dozens of women all thinking the same thing. Is today the day? Men in hats and muddy boots stand around, arms crossed, inspecting the lineup of eligible women like farmers at a livestock auction. You catch snippets of conversation. Someone muttering about good birthing hips, another debating the merits of strong ankles, a third just loudly regretting his first marriage over a tin mug of ale. You try not to listen, but it's hard not to, especially when your own worth is being debated like a sack of potatoes. Your father is there too, making small talk with the local auctioneer. A man with a voice that could crack windows and a mustache that might qualify as a separate species. She's a hard worker, this one. Healthy as an ox, good with a spinning wheel. Never complains. Never mind that you're standing right there, blushing into your boots, wishing you could disappear into the nearest rain barrel. As you wait your turn, you notice the other girls shifting nervously. Some stare at the ground, others feign indifference. One is actively plotting escape via the pig pen. Your best friend leans over and whispers, "If they ask about my cough, tell them it's just allergies." You nod, because in this world, every flaw is a bargaining chip, and every virtue is just another bullet point on your resume. And finally, the moment comes. You're ushered up onto a makeshift platform, told to twirl, smile, and maybe show you can lift a bucket without fainting. It's like a beauty pageant. But the prize is a lifetime of laundry and forced cheerfulness. As the auctioneer begins his patter, you close your eyes and take a deep breath, reminding yourself that in Victorian England, hope isn't sold at market, but survival sure is. Punchline. At least in today's world, the worst auction most of us face is bidding on eBay and accidentally winning a haunted toaster. In Victorian England, you were lucky if you could just keep your dignity from going to the highest bidder. Let's get one thing straight. In Victorian England, your value is a team sport and you are not the captain. The people around you, usually older, usually male, have decided that you're an asset in the family portfolio, somewhere between the dairy cow and your father's favorite waistcoat. You are a living, breathing, slightly nervous investment. And the economy? Oh, it runs on marriage, inheritance, and the desperate hope that you'll produce enough children to justify the cost of all those shoes you wore out as a toddler. This is not a world where your dreams and ambitions come first. If you're a woman, your path has already been mapped out by someone else's ink-stained hand. It's a society built on the illusion of order and progress. But beneath the gaslights and lace, everything is about money, legacy, and keeping the line going. You are less a person, more a solution to your family's financial strategy. Just smile, dear. You're the best interest rate we have, your mother says, adjusting your bonnet for the 5th time this morning. Never mind that you'd rather be reading penny dreadfuls or perfecting your left hook. Downstairs, the family is in a mild panic, as always. There's talk of debts, of cousins with suspiciously healthy sheep, of whether the Johnsons will send their son to the market this year, and whether your father can finally offload Aunt Margaret's wedding cutlery in the same transaction. You are the walking answer to all these worries. A flesh and blood savings bond with a very inconvenient tendency to get hysterical about being sold to a stranger who smells like boiled cabbage. Your future husband, whoever that is, will get not just you, but the entire invisible spreadsheet of your family's expectations. Are you sturdy? Can you cook? Can you produce sons who will carry on the glorious legacy of being slightly above average? Because the world runs on inheritance, not romance, and the only thing less romantic than a Victorian courtship is a Victorian accountant. You start to realize that love stories are for novels, and real life is more about property values and the alarming price of lamp oil. This is the era of dowries, contracts, and subtle threats disguised as compliments. Your parents have been quietly negotiating for months, at church, at the grocer, even at funerals. The Smith girl is strong, but our Mary has better teeth. The Bennett family may have a piano, but we've got working elbows. It's like an endless game of Monopoly, but instead of boardwalk, you're hoping to land somewhere that doesn't smell like goats and disappointment. Every so often, you'll hear a neighbor sigh over a cup of weak tea. A daughter is a blessing, but 2 is a burden, and 3 means you'd better start saving for flour and patience. And if you have brothers, congratulations. You get to be traded off to help them afford college, or at least a new pair of trousers. You are the family's wild card, a bargaining chip in an endless series of negotiations that have nothing to do with your happiness. And don't forget hysteria, the favorite Victorian diagnosis for any woman who dared ask questions, challenge authority, or display an ounce of independent thought. Your nerves are blamed for everything from the price of beef to why the vicar's son still isn't married. If you protest, you're difficult. If you cooperate, you're docile. Either way, someone else is balancing your emotional books. In the end, your value is measured in pounds, pence, and how many times your name appears in the family ledger. You're an asset, just not one that gets a say in where you're invested. Punchline. So next time you stress over your credit score, just remember, at least nobody's using it to decide how many goats you're worth at the next village auction. Progress. Market day. The cobblestones are damp. The air smells like fried onions and unspoken regrets. And the village green is alive with the sound of bartering, shouting, and the occasional runaway goose. You tug your shawl a little tighter and glance at the sign nailed to the auction block. Cattle? Pigs? Wheat? Oh, and apparently, wives. Welcome to the grand tradition of the Victorian wife sale. Less romantic than a Jane Austen novel, more awkward than a modern family group chat, and about as dignified as a soggy sack of turnips. If you're thinking, surely this is just a joke, a bit of rural myth, you'd be wrong. Victorian wife selling was not only a real thing, but a publicly accepted, if slightly frowned upon, solution for marital dissatisfaction. Think of it as a mix between a messy divorce and a farmer's market, except the main commodity is a living, breathing human who just wants a warm meal and maybe some basic respect. The process is both brutally simple and weirdly ceremonial. The husband, dissatisfied for any number of reasons, too many arguments, not enough porridge, the wrong sort of pies, would march his wife into town, slip a halter or rope around her arm, and declare her available for purchase. Not exactly the plot of a Valentine's Day card. You stand there, watching as a crowd gathers. Most are here for the spectacle, a break from the relentless routine of ploughing, milking, and trying not to die of boredom. Children whisper, "She's going for £2 and a pig." An old man shuffles closer, hoping to catch a bargain or at least a good story for next Sunday's gossip. Your cheeks burn, but there's an odd sort of camaraderie in the air. After all, at least you're not the only product on the shelf. The auction itself is anything but private. The auctioneer, a man who smells strongly of onions and a lifetime of regret, calls out for bids. Who'll start us off? Good cook, strong arms, knows how to keep a fire going. The crowd responds with a mixture of laughter, genuine offers, and occasional livestock noises. You're tempted to moo, just to lighten the mood. But you settle for a tight-lipped smile and a silent prayer that nobody tries to check your teeth. The entire charade is part public theatre, part desperate economics, and part loophole in England's labyrinthine marriage laws. Divorce is expensive, out of reach for almost everyone but the very rich, so this, bizarrely, becomes a poor man's solution. Instead of lawyers, paperwork, or hours of arguing about who gets the cat, there's just a rope, a crowd, and a new owner. If you're lucky, your next husband is slightly less awful than the last. If not, well, at least you might get a new hat out of the deal. Of course, not everyone takes it seriously. Some women treat the whole ordeal as an opportunity to trade up, angling for a neighbor with a bigger vegetable patch or, at the very least, better table manners. Others resist, stomp, or make a scene, reminding everyone that just because you're technically for sale doesn't mean you're going to smile and thank the customer. As the auction winds down and a final bid is accepted, 3 shillings, a sheep, and half a barrel of cider, you can't help but marvel at the utter strangeness of it all. This is marriage, Victorian style. Less waltzing under the stars, more haggling by the cheese stall, with a heavy dose of humiliation and just a pinch of hope. Punchline: if you ever feel awkward during a breakup text or a bad Tinder date, remember, you could have been sold next to a crate of turnips, while the whole village cheered on your market value. Swipe left on that history. Let's talk about hips, specifically yours. In Victorian England, hips weren't just a part of your body. They were practically a public commodity, judged, speculated about, and discussed with the clinical enthusiasm of a horse auction. If you thought family dinners were uncomfortable now, try living in a world where every third conversation circles back to your childbearing potential, as if your pelvis were the family's secret stock portfolio. It starts early. You're barely out of the schoolroom when the whispers begin. Aunt Beatrice nods knowingly at your good constitution, and your mother reminds you to eat your porridge because no one likes a fragile bride. It's not about strength for farm chores or running a 3-legged race at the village fete. It's all about future offspring. You're reminded, in case you'd forgotten, that your primary job in life is to be fruitful and multiply, and, if possible, not die in the process. The scrutiny is both silent and excruciatingly loud. In public, you're paraded at church, the May Fair, or, if fate is truly unkind, an actual auction. The menfolk, standing around like amateur scientists, nod in agreement at the robust look of your shoulders and the good width of your hips. You're examined with the same attention they'd give a new plough. Wide hips, less likely to perish in childbirth, they say, as if they're quoting the Royal Society, when in reality, they're mostly repeating something they overheard from old Tom at the pub. Victorian science on the subject is, to put it gently, a fever dream of half-baked ideas, folk wisdom, and desperate guesswork. There are pamphlets, expert lectures, and even doctors brought in to confirm that you are indeed well-formed for childbearing. Never mind that no 2 doctors can agree on what exactly this means, or that most of their experience comes from patching up farmers who tried to wrestle pigs after drinking too much cider. If your bones are considered good stock, your price and your marriage prospects rise accordingly. And of course, mothers and matchmakers have their own theories, handed down through generations of anxious bedtime stories. A sturdy girl won't fail, says your grandmother, patting your arm with the solemnity of a royal decree. Your cousin, on the other hand, once got dismissed as too narrow and now spends her days as the mysterious spinster aunt who haunts the family piano. In this world, being delicate is the social equivalent of a failed crop. Your wardrobe isn't safe from scrutiny either. Bustles, corsets, and layers of petticoats are designed to accentuate, exaggerate, or, in desperate cases, create the illusion of childbearing glory. Women pad their hips with extra linen or even sheep's wool. Some just hope the candlelight at the next dance is forgiving. Victorian fashion, where deception meets survival, and heaven help you if you're actually athletic. Running, climbing trees, or doing anything that makes you look too wiry could damage your prospects. You learn to walk with a calculated sway, not because it's attractive, but because it hints at pelvic spaciousness. Your hips have become both a marketing strategy and a local legend. And yet, under all this, you're still just a person trying to survive family dinners, public scrutiny, and an endless parade of men with opinions about your skeleton. Sometimes you daydream about a world where no one cares about your hip measurements, where science is about more than breeding, and where sturdy describes your sense of humor, not your bone structure. Punchline. In the end, Victorian science wasn't much different from modern Instagram filters, just another way for strangers to judge your body for things it never asked to be judged for. At least filters don't try to marry you off for your femur width. There's nothing quite like the Victorian obsession with family trees. If you thought modern holiday dinners were tense, try sitting through an evening where your great-uncle rolls out a parchment, charting everyone's ancestry back to a minor sheep thief in the 15th century. Welcome to the age where you're not just being judged for your manners or your embroidery skills, but for the purity and productivity of your family bloodline. Eugenics? Oh, Victorians may not have invented the word yet, but they were already playing the game like it was the village cricket final. From the moment you could toddle without tripping over your pinafore, the grown-ups were sizing you up, not just you, but your entire clan, your father's chin, your mother's hair, the stubborn tendency for everyone in your line to produce twins every third generation. It all matters. Your value is woven into an invisible but very real tapestry of genetics and gossip, and the wrong branch on your family tree could knock you down the marriage ladder faster than a bad batch of jam at the Women's Institute. Whenever there's talk of matches, the family trees come out like secret weapons. Your Aunt Margaret maintains a genealogy notebook so thick it could double as a weapon. You learn that a distant relative once married a Frenchman, scandal, and that your second cousin was rumored to be left-handed, which is clearly the reason you're not being considered for the rector's son. Family alliances are brokered in the back rooms of cottages and over lukewarm tea, with much muttering about sound breeding and good stock. If anyone in your line had a reputation for laziness, madness, or a suspicious fondness for poetry, you can kiss your social standing goodbye. The science of the time, or what passed for it, was little more than the folklore of local busybodies and pamphlets from self-appointed experts. Good blood meant you were less likely to go mad, more likely to produce children who survived until adulthood, and, ideally, wouldn't embarrass the family at Christmas. People scrutinized birth records, death certificates, and even dental structure, because nothing says marriage material like a promising set of molars. If your ancestors survived smallpox and could lift a hay bale, that went right to the top of your CV. And, of course, no discussion was complete without the family's unspoken eugenic wish list. Tall, sturdy, and free of scandal, you're in demand. Too clever, too sickly, or prone to artistic outbursts? Suddenly, your stock plummets. The village midwife can recite everyone's medical history like a town crier with a grudge, and every marriage proposal is a quiet referendum on your family's breeding record. You'd like to think you have a say, but your opinion comes somewhere after the cow's opinion, and just before the local blacksmiths. All this careful planning, as you'll eventually realize, is an attempt to engineer a family line so impressive it might outlast the local manor house. But for every grand plan, there's a spectacular failure, a branch with bad blood, a cousin who runs off to join the circus, or the legendary great-aunt who refused to marry anyone and instead devoted her life to training hedgehogs. The Victorians kept such stories quiet, but the hedgehogs remembered. You sit quietly at the table while the elders argue about names, dates, and possible matches, trying to ignore the fact that your romantic future is being discussed in the same breath as a potato harvest. You wish for a world where you could just marry for love, or at least for slightly better conversation. Punchline. If you ever wondered why British people love dogs so much, it's probably because dog shows are the only socially acceptable way left to judge breeding stock. At least with poodles, Nobody asks about your great-grandmother's suspiciously strong moustache. It's Sunday morning, and instead of scrolling through dating apps in bed, you're at the kitchen table, quill in hand, staring down a sheet of crisp linen paper. Welcome to the Victorian era, where your love life doesn't hinge on a witty bio and a decent selfie, but on the world's most unintentionally hilarious personal ad. Think Tinder, but if your mother was allowed to edit your profile and the whole village could read it in the newspaper. You are about to become a matrimonial advertisement, Victorian England's answer to the modern dating crisis, with about the same amount of awkwardness and a lot more ink stains. It starts with your parents, always your parents. They gather round the table, discussing what details to include and what unfortunate truths to leave out. Your father wants to highlight your sound disposition and robust health, while your mother insists on mentioning your needlework skills and that time you won a pie baking contest at the spring fair, never mind that you tripped and launched half the pie into the vicar's lap. The final product is a cross between a livestock auction listing and a letter of recommendation written by someone who hasn't spoken to you since you were 9. The language is nothing if not specific. Sturdy, cheerful, and of agreeable appearance, one ad proclaims, as if you're a new model of steam-powered carriage. Another boasts good teeth, wide hips, and a pleasing singing voice. Some families, anxious to climb the social ladder, get creative. Strong moral character, immune to croup, and able to carry 2 buckets of water uphill without complaint. By the time the description is finished, you barely recognize yourself. You sound less like a human being and more like the world's least exciting superhero. Practical lass, defender of the dowry. Your flaws? Those get the creative editing treatment. If you're a little too opinionated, it's spirited. Nearsighted? Dreamy-eyed? Prone to migraines? Prays often and is fond of rest. The family dog gets a better write-up, but at least he isn't expected to churn out 8 children and never talk back. If you're truly unlucky, a cousin suggests including your knowledge of Latin, but this is quickly vetoed. Nobody wants a wife who might outsmart her husband. Once the advertisement is crafted, it's dispatched to the local newspaper, where it joins dozens of others vying for attention in the matrimonial section. The paper smells faintly of ink and desperation. Readers scan the listings like bargain hunters at a jumble sale, circling potential matches and weighing their options with all the romance of a cattle market. Would-be suitors write polite, excruciatingly formal replies, usually vetted by their own mothers, and the courtship begins with a flurry of awkward introductions and endless references to the weather. Meeting a candidate is even more uncomfortable. There are no candlelit dinners, no discreet flirting. Instead, you sit in a parlor under the withering gaze of 3 aunts, drinking weak tea and pretending to care about crop rotation. Your match might be a shy widower with 7 children, or a young man whose main virtue is that he lives 2 villages away and owns his own boots. Despite all this, a few brave souls do find companionship. Sometimes, miraculously, the descriptions are true, and 2 sensible, agreeable people decide to endure life together. More often, though, it's just another round of disappointment, with everyone retreating to rewrite their advertisements and pretend they're totally fine being single for another year. Punchline: next time your dating profile gets ghosted, remember, at least no one's publicly describing your ankles as serviceable or your singing voice as unobjectionable. Swipe right for progress. Swipe left for Aunt Margaret's editorial skills. It's market day, a weekly spectacle in your little corner of Victorian England, where you wake to the clang of church bells, the screech of chickens, and the anxious flutter of your own heart. As you shuffle toward the town square, the cobblestones still slick from last night's rain, you try not to think about the reason you're here. It's not for apples or ribbons or even gossip. Today, you're here because your name is on the list, and someone has decided you're fit for the auction block. The smells hit you first: damp earth, frying onions, horse sweat, and the sharp tang of anticipation. Vendors shout about potatoes, children dart underfoot, and the air hums with the usual mix of hope and doom. But in one corner, the atmosphere thickens. Here stands the eligible stock, not sheep or pigs this time, but a row of nervous women, all doing their best to look lively, healthy, and only mildly terrified. If you're lucky, your boots aren't leaking, your skirt isn't muddy, and your mother remembered to iron your best petticoat. But today, luck feels as rare as a sympathetic father-in-law. You try not to meet the eyes of the crowd. Men of all ages stand by, hats in hand, examining the lineup with the casual interest of people assessing firewood. Some are shy, some are bold, and some are just there for the entertainment. You know most of these faces. There's old Mr. Barker, who claims he's here to buy apples, but somehow always winds up in front of the auction platform, shaking his head and muttering about the good old days. There's the local baker, whose bread is as dense as his stare. Somewhere, a dog barks, as if to remind everyone that at least someone's excited to be outside. You stand tall, because that's what you're supposed to do. Shoulders back, chin up, and try not to fidget. Your mother hovers nearby, nervously brushing imaginary lint from your sleeve and hissing last-minute reminders. Smile. No, not like that. Show you've got teeth, but not too many. She is simultaneously your coach, your stylist, and your personal crisis manager. Behind you, other women murmur encouragement or swap escape fantasies. One friend whispers that she's practiced fainting just in case, while another claims she can hop a fence in her petticoats if things get desperate. Then the auctioneer appears, wearing a top hat slightly too small for his head and a grin that's seen better days. He's practiced at this, the sing-song patter, the exaggerated gestures, the way he describes each woman as if she's a prize ham with excellent marbling and fine prospects for future yield. You feel your cheeks burn as he extols your strong constitution, pleasant temperament, and remarkable tolerance for unwashed socks. The crowd chuckles. A few men exchange glances, weighing their options. Bidding begins, and it's surreal. Nods, raised hands, the occasional muttered negotiation about throwing in a chicken. You find yourself hoping for a decent offer, not too low, not so high that you become a cautionary tale at future markets. Meanwhile, a woman beside you gets snapped up by a local farmer with an impressive beard and a reputation for being mostly agreeable. She shrugs as she steps off the platform, already planning what to do with her new life and, hopefully, her own room. As the crowd thins and the last bid is taken, you step down, heart thumping. Whether you found a match or not, you survived. For now, you get to return home, shoes scuffed, dignity mostly intact, and only a little traumatized by the experience. Punchline. So next time you feel awkward at a work mixer, remember, you could be standing on a muddy platform, being compared to last week's potatoes. At least networking events don't end with someone haggling over your yield. Let's talk about the unsung power players of Victorian matchmaking, the marriage brokers. You might imagine romance was a private affair, the slow build of candlelit glances and stolen moments in the rose garden. No such luck. Here, it's all business, and the chief executive is a busybody with a ledger, a sharp nose for gossip, and absolutely zero sense of personal boundaries. Enter the marriage broker, half matchmaker, half used wagon salesman, half unlicensed therapist, and entirely your problem. You know one when you see her, or him, but usually her, bustling around the village in sensible shoes, hair in a bun wound so tight it could snap a piano wire, and armed with an uncanny knowledge of who's got what and who needs who. The marriage broker is both revered and feared, welcomed at every table but trusted by no one. She collects secrets like a crow collects shiny things, then uses them as currency in the village's great social chess game. Your deepest wish? She knows it. Your worst habit? She's written it down in a notebook thicker than the family Bible. Her home is a nerve center of Victorian logistics. There are stacks of letters, lists of eligible sons and daughters, and a confidential folder containing more blackmail material than the average Victorian barrister. She has a memory for scandal that would make an elephant jealous, and a talent for producing the most mortifying information at precisely the wrong moment. Need to be reminded of that time you sneezed on the mayor's wife? She's got the date and weather conditions on file. The process is clinical. You sit down, sometimes with your entire family, sometimes alone, but never comfortably, while the broker evaluates you. Are you biddable? Do you have all your teeth? Can you churn butter with one hand and swat flies with the other? She'll ask about your cooking, your temperament, your opinions on seasonal root vegetables. This is not the moment for originality. The correct answers are, yes, ma'am, of course, ma'am, and, when in doubt, I'm very fond of potatoes, actually. Then comes the matching. The broker flips through her ledger with the gravitas of a judge issuing a sentence. She reads aloud names, occupations, and mysterious comments like good shoulders or keen on hymnals. Suitors are sorted by income, acreage, and the absence of truly scandalous relatives. You're encouraged to be flexible. There's a war on, or a bad harvest, or someone's cousin ran off with the coal merchant again. If you're lucky, she'll have a short list that includes at least one person you don't actively dislike. Negotiations follow. There's talk of dowries, chickens, new boots, or, in rare cases, an old piano that just needs a little tuning. The broker offers advice on how to make yourself more marketable. A fresh ribbon, a less alarming laugh, or, if things are dire, a few strategic absences from church to avoid appearing too available. She'll even stage manage introductions, tea in her parlour, awkward walks in the garden, and the forced merriment of parlour games that have ended more marriages than they've begun. If the match goes well, she expects a modest fee, a goose, a ham, or a basket of apples. If not, she keeps your name in the ledger, always ready for next time. There's no refund, but she's happy to offer further opportunities in the form of the village's most eligible widowers. Punchline. So, the next time your relatives pester you about settling down, be grateful you don't live in a world where your entire romantic future depends on the whims of a woman who can make or break your life with one well-placed eyebrow. You may have bartered for apples, haggled over cabbages, or even driven a hard bargain for a used plough, but nothing prepares you for the delicate art of the Victorian wife auction. Forget flowers and nervous proposals. Here, matrimony is a negotiation, and your personal value is decided by the same rules as a sack of barley, plus or minus a sheep. The morning of the auction, you find yourself polished, starched, and presented like the village's most ambitious cheese. Prospective buyers, also known as husbands, mill about the market, pockets heavy with coins and opinions. The crowd is thick with mothers, aunts, and amateur matchmakers, all prepared to weigh in, literally and figuratively, on the value of each woman up for bid. If you're lucky, your supporters have rehearsed a few key phrases. Healthy stock, very handy with a mop, and, for advanced negotiations, descended from a line of formidable bread makers. It begins with the auctioneer, always a man with a voice strong enough to wake the dead, and a talent for hyperbole. He surveys the candidates, sizes up the crowd, and launches into the sales pitch. Ladies and gentlemen, what am I bid for this fine, hard-working specimen? Can churn butter, patch socks, and outstare a stubborn goat. The bidders murmur and nod, some raising an eyebrow, others clutching their coin purses as if afraid of sudden inflation. Bidding is its own kind of theatre. The opening offer is always insultingly low, designed to test the waters. Maybe someone offers a few pence, a particularly ambitious hen, or half a sack of potatoes with a questionable smell. This is not an insult, it's tradition. Everyone knows the first offer is never accepted, except by accident or in-laws with a twisted sense of humor. Next comes the counter bid, usually from a rival who's been eyeing the competition all season. Now the offers rise. Coins, livestock, the promise of 3 Sunday roasts, or, for a truly promising bride, a length of imported ribbon and a pair of boots with only minimal holes. The crowd buzzes, mothers whisper, fathers grumble, and the bride-to-be tries not to faint or, worse, laugh at the wrong moment. Occasionally, haggling takes a personal turn. The auctioneer may extol your fine complexion or muscular calves, and a particularly competitive suitor might loudly offer an extra goat just to outdo his neighbor. If negotiations stall, a friend or cousin might jump in with a convenient tale of your bread-baking prowess or your legendary ability to survive winter without a single complaint. Every offer, every counter-offer, every nervous cough in the crowd is part of the dance. Of course, not everyone comes away satisfied. Sometimes the bids stall, the offers get too creative. I'll throw in my mother's apple pie recipe. Or a rival suitor storms off in a huff because his best chicken lost out to a slightly larger pig. The auctioneer, a true professional, keeps things moving, refusing to be distracted by melodrama or the occasional barnyard escapee. At last, a final offer is made. Enough coins, goods, or promises to satisfy the family and, hopefully, not embarrass the bride. Hands are shaken. Contracts are, sometimes, signed. And you, the winning lot, are paraded away with a new name, new expectations, and the hope that your new household comes with fewer drafty windows than your old one. Punchline. So the next time you negotiate a salary or haggle at a flea market, take heart. You're following a long tradition. At least today, nobody's trying to sweeten the deal with a side of goats and the family's prize turnip. Progress. Now comes the part of Victorian courtship that every woman dreads and every village gossip relishes. The inspection. You'd hoped all those stories about parading livestock were just rural legend, but here you are, standing on a rickety platform in your best, and possibly only, dress, waiting to be visually audited like a prize-winning squash at the county fair. If first impressions count, this is more like a tax audit with bonnets. The inspection starts with posture. You're told to stand tall, shoulders back, chin up, eyes forward, but not too proud, or you'll look unmanageable. You practice a modest smile, the kind that says, "I'm approachable but not desperate," and pray your knees don't knock audibly. The crowd, a mix of eager suitors and professional busybodies, surveys you like auction goers at a livestock show. No detail is too small for their scrutiny. The way your hair sits under your cap, the condition of your boots, the straightness of your back. There's a running commentary. She's got her mother's ankles. Not sure about that freckle. Lovely teeth, at least in this light. If you're lucky, your mother is there, subtly angling you to catch the best sunlight, muttering, "Show them your hands, dear. Not the left. Remember the incident with the spinning wheel." She hovers, part stage manager, part defensive coach, prepared to jump in and explain away any perceived flaw. The goal is to demonstrate that you're healthy, sturdy, and capable of producing a full set of heirs, but not so robust that you'll outlive everyone and inherit the farm. Next comes the physical twirl, a gentle rotation to show off your figure, the craftsmanship of your dress, and any assets that might catch the eye of an ambitious suitor or his calculating mother. If you're particularly unlucky, you'll be asked to walk across the platform, balancing a basket or carrying a jug, just to prove you can haul firewood or water without toppling over. One girl once fainted mid-inspection, but she turned it into a triumph when a passing farmer declared her delicate, like a real lady. The competition is fierce, and the standards are creatively arbitrary. Of course, no inspection is complete without the health check. People want to know you're not hiding any fatal ailments or, worse, a history of complaining. Your skin is discreetly examined for suspicious rashes. Your teeth, if you dare, are shown in a brief smile, and your hands are inspected for signs of excessive softness or scandalous calluses. Sturdy but not coarse, they say. Gentle but not fragile. If you have the misfortune of sneezing, you might be docked a few points for delicacy. Finally, there's the interview portion where you're asked polite but revealing questions. Can you sew a hem? How's your jam? Would you consider living in a house with more chickens than people? Your answers are supposed to be cheerful but humble. Skilled but not intimidating, you do your best, aware that every word is being weighed for signs of stubbornness, laziness, or, heaven forbid, wit. As the inspection winds down, you're ushered off the platform, cheeks flushed and dignity barely holding on. The crowd disperses, eager to share notes, compare rankings, and speculate about your prospects. You return to your mother's side, comforted only by the knowledge that at least the ordeal is over. For this week, anyway. Punchline. So the next time you're stressed about a job interview or a first date, remember, at least no one is asking you to parade in front of the neighbors while your hands and teeth are scored like Olympic events. Small mercies, modern life. If you've ever felt pressure from your family to do something with your life, just be grateful they're not measuring your accomplishments in cows, chickens, and IOUs. In Victorian England, your value as a daughter isn't just emotional, it's cold, hard, and almost always in the red. Welcome to a world where your dowry is less a chest of gleaming coins and more a polite promise that someday, somehow, your future husband might actually get paid. Spoiler, he usually won't. The drama starts at breakfast. Your parents exchange pointed glances over porridge, whispering about the Johnsons' generous settlement and sighing over the lack of gold hidden in the family mattress. It turns out, your father's only real asset is a pair of serviceable boots and a dog that refuses to herd anything except leftovers. Your mother, who long ago perfected the art of sighing with meaning, reminds you, and the wallpaper, that good marriages are built on good dowries. You're starting to suspect she means good marriages are built on imaginary money. As you go about your chores, you notice your parents' quiet strategizing. Your mother inventories your wardrobe with the precision of a military quartermaster. 2 dresses that pass for new if squinted at, a single ribbon still mostly red, and a shawl with character. She eyes your shoes, wondering aloud if they can be dyed to look more expensive. Meanwhile, your father tinkers in the shed, allegedly repairing the plow, but really rehearsing the speech he'll give to any prospective suitor about family honor and future prospects. Translation: we're broke, but she's very agreeable. The real fun begins when marriage negotiations start. The matchmaker arrives, ledger in hand, to discuss financial arrangements. There is much nodding, vague talk of future windfalls, and promises that next year's barley crop will definitely turn things around. When the subject of your dowry comes up, your parents confidently declare it will be modest but meaningful. In reality, modest means non-existent, and meaningful means we hope your uncle's lottery ticket finally pays out. Your suitor's family, meanwhile, is equally invested in the theatre. They pretend not to notice the suspiciously light dowry chest or the creative bookkeeping. We're not in it for the money, his mother insists, but she spends a lot of time measuring the size of your family's potato field. There's an unspoken agreement. Everyone is broke, everyone's pretending not to be, and everyone hopes the other side blinks first. If you have siblings, the calculations get even wilder. Every brother is a rival for inheritance. Every sister a competitor for whatever hand-me-down ribbon is still circulating. At dinner, you all eye each other across the table like poker players in a high-stakes bluff. The one who gets married first might secure a better match, assuming there's anything left to give. Younger siblings are both allies and enemies, joining you in elaborate schemes to inflate your family's worth, such as loudly admiring the imported curtains made from old flour sacks. Whenever guests visit, despite all this, family bonds are strong. You conspire with your siblings to make a good impression, help each other patch up clothes, and swap tips on how to make porridge taste less like existential dread. Your parents, for all their scheming, want the best for you. They just wish the best came with a few more sheep. Punchline. So the next time your parents ask when you'll get married, be grateful they're not negotiating your future with promissory notes and a dowry chest full of IOUs. In the Victorian era, love was blind, but it could do basic arithmetic and usually needed a loan. If you ever fantasized about making a dramatic exit, the Victorian marriage auction was the ultimate proving ground. For some women, standing on the platform, cheeks burning and knees knocking, the only reasonable response was to quietly, or not so quietly, flee the scene. Welcome to the high-stakes, low-speed world of auction evasion, a blend of strategy, improvisation, and the occasional fainting spell that would put any Oscar winner to shame. Escape always starts with planning. Some women rehearse their route for weeks, plotting every alley, pig pen, and suspiciously tall pile of cabbages between the auction block and the nearest safe house. The trick is to look as inconspicuous as possible, a real challenge when your every move is being watched by half the village and your mother is clinging to your sleeve like you're a particularly valuable tablecloth at a church jumble sale. The most popular technique? Fainting. A well-timed swoon is the Swiss Army knife of Victorian womanhood. With enough drama and just a hint of realism, a little forehead dabbing, a sigh, eyes fluttering, you can go from prime stock to medical emergency in 5 seconds flat. The upside: everyone fusses over you and forgets about the auction. The downside: you may wake up to the village doctor prescribing a brisk walk and a cold compress, followed by a renewed attempt to sell you next week. Others go for the lost-in-the-crowd approach. At the busiest moment, when everyone's watching the auctioneer haggle over someone else's pleasant temperament, you quietly slip off the platform and melt into the chaos. A quick turn behind a hay cart, a borrowed bonnet, and you're just another face in the crowd, albeit one with a suspiciously urgent sense of direction. Sometimes, sympathetic friends or siblings run interference, accidentally on purpose knocking over a barrel or starting a heated debate about the merits of turnip farming to give you cover. For the truly bold, disguise is the name of the game. Victorian England may not have had much in the way of superhero capes, but a borrowed coat, a soot-smeared face, and an exaggerated limp could turn you into a chimney sweep or errand boy in the eyes of the most distracted villager. One legend tells of a girl who evaded her auction by dressing as the family goat herder, complete with muddy boots and an attitude of grim resignation. She reportedly spent the rest of the afternoon napping in the hayloft, blissfully unbothered by matrimonial negotiations. Then there's the slow burn rebellion. Women who simply refuse to cooperate. No fainting, no running, just quiet, dogged resistance. Arms crossed, lips pursed, and a refusal to answer questions about butter churning or ankle measurements. It's not as flashy as a dramatic exit, but it's surprisingly effective. After all, a reluctant bride is a risky investment, and even the most determined suitor may think twice before bidding on someone who greets every offer with the enthusiasm of a damp sponge. Of course, escaping the auction isn't a guarantee of freedom. You might find yourself in trouble with your family, the broker, or the entire town's social calendar. But for a brief, shining moment, you've reclaimed a little bit of control and maybe, just maybe, bought yourself another week of peace. Punchline: so next time you dream of making a swift exit from an awkward party, remember the Victorian women who perfected the art. At least you don't have to dodge marriage brokers, faint on cue, or disguise yourself as livestock just to avoid a bad date. Now that's what I call progress. If you think city life is rough, you've clearly never experienced the raw terror of a rural Victorian marriage market. In the countryside, romance is less moonlit strolls by the river and more "please don't compare me to a turnip in public." Welcome to the agricultural heartland, where sheep outnumber people, privacy is a foreign concept, and your marriage prospects are evaluated somewhere between the pumpkin competition and the annual cheese rolling. The day begins at sunrise, as all good nightmares do. The whole village is up, bustling about in their best, or at least cleanest clothes, ready for the big event. There's a festival vibe, banners strung between trees, tables groaning under the weight of preserves, pies, and enough root vegetables to build a modest fortress. But somewhere near the livestock pens, a makeshift stage waits for its real purpose. Not to showcase prize-winning geese, but eligible women. You shuffle into line behind the other hopefuls, all trying desperately to look cheerful and not at all like they'd rather be mucking out a barn. The gossip is relentless. Did you see Mary's new bonnet? I hear the Wilson girl can knit a pair of socks in an hour flat. I once saw Jane scare off a fox with just her glare. If you're unlucky, your own relatives are loudly speculating about your prospects, ranking you between the biggest carrot and the longest-lasting apple tart. As the showing begins, the crowd surges forward. Farmers, merchants, and the occasional bachelor uncle elbow for a better view. Here, the judging is open and unapologetic. You're asked to demonstrate your skills, churn butter, balance a bucket, maybe even recite a verse or two if the parson's feeling literary. It's less a talent show and more a public test of wifeability. A round of polite applause greets a well-tied apron or an especially neat plate, while an unfortunate stumble or a dropped pie earns nervous laughter and the occasional sympathetic sigh. Unlike city markets, rural marriage fairs are blunt. Negotiations happen out loud, with mothers debating the virtues of various girls like seasoned market traders. She's got strong hands and never complains about mud. That one survived the fever last winter, good stock, hardy. Occasionally someone haggles over a dowry right there in the open, as if negotiating over potatoes rather than a person's entire future. The worst part? There is no escaping. With fields stretching for miles in every direction and a population that knows your business before you do, there's nowhere to hide. Any attempt at subtlety is doomed. One girl who tried to sneak away was found napping under a wagon and became the punchline of every harvest festival for years. Even your best friend can't help you. She's busy trying not to spill her family's secret pickle recipe to impress a passing miller. Still, there's camaraderie in the absurdity. You and the other girls share nervous smiles, cracked jokes, and, when nobody's looking, leftover biscuits. Sometimes, in the midst of all the awkwardness, you remember that you're not alone. Everyone here is just trying to get through the day with their dignity and hopefully their favorite apron intact. At the end of the fair, you're sent home, sometimes matched, sometimes not, always exhausted. You brush hay from your skirt, dodge nosy neighbors, and retreat to the relative safety of home, grateful that at least tomorrow you'll be judged for your bread, not your biceps. Punchline. So next time you feel embarrassed at a family reunion, picture yourself balancing a bucket on your head while your neighbors debate your suitability as a spouse. Suddenly, Uncle Dave's karaoke isn't so bad. If you've ever worried about the fine print in a contract, Victorian England would give you hives. While modern life is full of legal grey areas, think gym memberships, mobile phone plans, or buying a used car from someone named Honest Pete, the Victorians took ambiguity to a whole new level, especially when it came to marriage and the unsettling business of wife selling. The law, officially, did not approve of selling people, least of all wives. There were no government pamphlets encouraging you to list your spouse at the nearest market. But, much like jaywalking or parking on a double yellow line, rules were more like guidelines, especially if everyone agreed to pretend nothing strange was happening. It was, in classic Victorian style, a legal loophole you could drive a hay wagon through. Here's how it worked. You couldn't legally sell your wife, but if you happened to lead her to the market, offer her up to the highest bidder, and everyone, including her, played along, the authorities usually looked the other way. Why? Because divorce was expensive, so costly and complicated that most people would need to marry their accountant just to afford the paperwork. If you were poor, unlucky, or just plain tired of arguing about the laundry, public sale was the practical alternative. Technically illegal, but socially tolerated, as long as nobody made too much fuss. For the woman at the center of this drama, consent was a slippery concept. If you agreed to the sale, or simply didn't faint, protest, or bolt for the hedgerow, the community saw it as a reasonable solution. After all, you were being transferred like a particularly valuable pie recipe, awkward but less scandalous than an official separation. The law frowned, the vicar scowled, but unless someone was making a scene, most townsfolk treated the transaction like any other bit of rural business. Of course, not every woman went along willingly. If you dug in your heels, the story changed. A forced sale, a husband dragging a weeping wife to market against her will, was more likely to draw the ire of local constables or a well-aimed loaf of bread from a nearby matron. At its worst, you could end up as a cautionary tale, used by preachers and pamphleteers as evidence that society was falling apart, one unhappy household at a time. But ambiguity was the law of the land. Court cases came and went, with judges issuing long-winded verdicts about public decency and the natural order of marriage, usually while sidestepping the question entirely. The newspapers loved these stories, columns filled with moral outrage, legal confusion, and just enough scandal to keep readers hooked. In truth, the only real rule was don't get caught causing trouble. As long as the sale was quiet, and everyone kept their dignity, or at least their hat, the law usually shrugged and went back to more important matters, like investigating missing turnips. For the record, you could not be legally sold, at least not on paper, but with a little cooperation, some creative pretending, and a community that prized discretion over justice, it happened all the same. For every wife who managed to escape or refuse, there were many who simply went along, knowing that the alternative, endless arguments, poverty, or scandal, was often worse. Punchline. So the next time you get lost in the fine print, remember Victorian England, where illegal was just another word for as long as no one complains, it's probably fine. And if anyone tries to trade you for a pig and a half-finished pie, maybe ask for the legal terms in writing. So, you're standing in a Victorian kitchen, elbows deep in bread dough, and you realize you have three options: become someone's prize-winning broodmare, vanish into spinsterhood, or find a creative way to wriggle out of the whole breeding stock routine. The good news? Victorian women were experts at dodging, ducking, and, when necessary, downright defying the system, if only by an inch or two at a time. Of course, rebellion in this era rarely involved storming the barricades or declaring independence on the town green. It was quieter, subtler, a long, slow resistance fought with knitting needles, fainting couches, and the mysterious power of simply saying no, or at least perhaps another time. Some women escaped by refusing to fit the mold. Too clever, too outspoken, too interested in Greek poetry or the latest scandal from London, they became eccentric, unmanageable, or just not quite right for the local eligible bachelors. Sometimes that was all it took. If your opinions were lively enough, or your baking just odd enough, you might be gently nudged off the marriage market and into the ranks of the legendary spinster aunts. Others took the more practical approach. They found respectable jobs, usually in service, teaching, or as a governess in a distant cousin's gloomy manor. Sure, the pay was poor, and the hours were long, but at least no one was actively haggling over your dowry while you served tea. These women forged a path outside marriage, building lives that were often solitary, but sometimes, shockingly, free. You might be called pitiable by your married sisters, but at least your name wasn't up for bidding at the next county fair. For the boldest, escape meant actual flight. There are tales of women sneaking out at dawn, dressed as stable boys or peddlers, hopping a cart to the nearest city, and disappearing into the anonymous bustle of urban life. Victorian London was filled with mysterious Mrs. Smiths, each with a past more colourful than the wallpaper in a seaside boarding house. The village might whisper, but the city would forget, and sometimes that was enough. Then there were the quiet rebels, women who went along with marriage, but made their opinions and limits painfully clear. Refusing to bear more children, managing the family's money, running a side business, or keeping their own bank account, hidden, of course, in the lining of a sewing basket. These little acts of rebellion were sometimes tolerated, sometimes punished, but always memorable. It was the art of survival, giving just enough to meet expectations, while carving out small pockets of autonomy in a world built to deny it. Even within families, resistance took root. Sisters covered for each other, swapped chores, or helped stage fainting spells at just the right moment. Some mothers, having survived the auction block themselves, quietly encouraged their daughters to take your time or consider your options. A well-timed cold, a conveniently delayed return from market, or a sudden fascination with Latin grammar could buy precious months, sometimes years, of freedom. Of course, not every act of defiance led to happiness or safety. Risks were real, and the consequences could be harsh. But every quietly unmarried aunt, every schoolteacher who never came home, every woman who managed to say no to the wrong proposal added another tiny crack in the system. Punchline. So, if you've ever said not today to someone else's plans for your life, you're in good company. Victorian women couldn't always escape the label, but they became experts at stretching, folding, and sometimes outright losing it in the laundry. One small act of rebellion at a time. If you thought the marriage market in Victorian England was tough on the average woman, imagine being a noblewoman. Suddenly, the stakes are much higher, the dresses are much heavier, and the price of failure isn't just a bad husband, it's an entire family's status plummeting faster than a souffle in a thunderstorm. For the noble class, marriage wasn't about love, compatibility, or even tolerable snoring. It was about breeding, and not just in the please produce several healthy children sense, but in the let's make sure the bloodline is at least 80% respectable, and ideally not suspiciously French sense. You awaken in a four-poster bed, surrounded by silk drapes and a heavy sense of responsibility. Your mother is already at your side, reciting a list of eligible gentlemen whose family trees have been checked for madness, bankruptcy, and, worst of all, artistic tendencies. She's not so much encouraging you to find happiness as she is directing a one-woman play called How Not to Marry Below Our Station. Your job? To secure an alliance that will keep the family name polished, the estate funded, and the local gossips in awe. It sounds glamorous. It isn't. Your entire adolescence has been a slow parade of dances, teas, and strategic strolls through rose gardens. Every glance, every handshake, every ill-advised giggle in the conservatory is weighed for future political consequences. Your worth is determined by your father's title, your mother's reputation, your own ability to remain upright in a corset, and whether you can play a passable nocturne without fainting from boredom. When it comes time to marry, the scrutiny is endless. Families send letters back and forth, swapping medical histories like baseball cards. Your hips, your height, your temperament, all are catalogued and compared. But for the upper crust, it's not just about physical assets, it's also about lineage. Noble families keep ledgers thicker than some Bibles, obsessively tracking every branch and twig on the family tree. A whiff of scandal, a mad cousin, a bankrupt uncle, an unfortunate connection to trade, and your stock drops overnight. The best matches are often the worst-kept secrets. More than one noble girl has been married off to a distant cousin, just to keep the bloodline pure. You learn to smile politely when someone points out that your new fiancé looks remarkably like your Uncle Gerald. Nobody mentions the risk of children with ears that stick out in creative directions, or the slightly worrying family fondness for dramatic fainting fits. After all, it's for the good of the house. Romance, if it happens at all, is accidental. You might fall in love with a footman, a poet, or, heaven forbid, a minor baronet from a family with questionable taste in wallpaper. But such attachments are quickly and firmly discouraged. Love is for novels, not for contracts signed in triplicate. If you do get a choice, it's usually between ambitious but slightly dull viscount and charming but financially precarious earl. Either way, your main job is to keep producing children, hosting interminable dinners, and not accidentally trigger an international incident by serving the wrong fish fork. Still, noble women had their ways of coping. Some became legendary hostesses, wielding their social power to influence everything from local charities to international politics. Others became quietly eccentric, raising peacocks or collecting obscure minerals. A lucky few even found happiness in arranged matches, proving that miracles do happen. Punchline. So next time you worry about awkward family dinners, spare a thought for the noblewoman balancing bloodlines, dinner parties, and the threat of marrying her own cousin, because when it came to class, the real challenge was surviving the pedigree paperwork. Heirs, say you're living in Victorian England and you've got a problem, a big one, at least by 19th century standards. Maybe you're a little too frail. Maybe your eyesight is poor, or your complexion isn't quite hearty enough, or you have a mysterious cough that refuses to go away. Perhaps you're simply too clever for your own good. Congratulations, you've been labelled unbreedable. The era's most backhanded way of saying you're not quite what the local gene pool was hoping for. This isn't a label you get to peel off and forget about. It's a slow, creeping diagnosis, whispered behind fans at parties and reinforced every time Aunt Mildred brings up that unfortunate incident with the fainting at Whitsun. The word spreads with the speed and discretion of jam at a church picnic. You hear it in the careful tone of the marriage broker, in the sidelong glances from mothers with eligible sons, in the way your father suddenly becomes fascinated with the weather whenever suitors come to call. Being unbreedable is a social sentence. For some, it's medical, delicate lungs, nervous temperament, prone to fits, or just plain unlucky genetics. For others, it's behavioral, too outspoken, too opinionated, too interested in things like science, politics, or novels with endings that don't involve marriage. Either way, your prospects plummet. Suddenly, you're not in demand at the market. You're not prime stock anymore. You're the family secret, tucked away in the parlor with the old soup tureen and a copy of Pilgrim's Progress for company. Of course, your family tries to cope. Your mother insists. She's just waiting for the right match, while your siblings invent increasingly bizarre stories to explain why you're still at home. She's needed for her embroidery skills. She's helping father with his accounts. She's taking a sabbatical from public life. Meanwhile, you're expected to make yourself useful, teaching, mending, organizing, and always keeping your head down. Sometimes, being unbreedable means becoming the mysterious spinster aunt. You know the type. Always present at family gatherings, quietly knitting in the corner, rumored to have a tragic backstory and a stash of excellent sweets. The children both fear and adore you. Adults avoid asking questions. But everyone agrees you bake the best biscuits and can identify birds by their call. Spinsterhood isn't glamorous, but it does come with its own perks. Control over the tea selection, the best chair by the fire, and a reputation for wisdom that grows with every year you remain unmarried. For others, the fate is harsher. You might be packed off to a distant relative, sent to a convent, or employed as a governess in a drafty manner. These positions come with endless work and very little gratitude, but at least you're safe from the relentless pressure of the marriage market. There's even a strange freedom in being written off. No more inspections, no more parading, just a quiet life out of the limelight, with only the occasional rumor for company. But for all its disadvantages, being labeled unbreedable isn't the end. Some women thrive in their unexpected independence. Free from the constant scrutiny, they pursue hobbies, form friendships, and quietly shape their own destinies. They become confidants, secret keepers, and, best of all, the only ones in the family who can say exactly what they think because, well, what else are they going to do? Ruin their prospects? Punchline. So the next time you worry about not fitting someone else's expectations, remember the unbreedable Victorians, rejected by the marriage market, embraced by their own weird and wonderful lives. Sometimes, the leftovers make the best stories. If you've ever signed a rental agreement without reading the fine print, you have a taste of the Victorian marriage contract experience. Except, instead of worrying about pet deposits, you're negotiating your entire future as if you're a prize-winning heifer with unusually good manners. Welcome to the world of breeding contracts, where the language is legal, the stakes are generational, and your signature is worth roughly the same as your ability to survive childbirth. The process begins with paperwork, mountains of it. While poets dreamed of romance and artists painted love, the real architects of marriage were the lawyers. Pale men with ink-stained fingers and a fondness for phrases like issue of the body and succession rights. No one is allowed near the altar until the ink is dry, and everyone's agreed on what happens if, say, the first wife comes back from the dead demanding her old cutlery set. In these negotiations, you are the central asset. The contract outlines your duties: bear children, manage the household, try not to embarrass the family name, and specifies your rights: a small allowance, a separate bedroom if you're lucky, and, in rare cases, the right to visit mother on Whitsun. Everything from dowry payments to inheritance of the soup tureen is covered. If your new husband's family is ambitious, there's even a clause about the proper storage of family silver and what to do in case of sudden madness. There's a peculiar poetry to the language. To have and to hold is less a vow and more an inventory list. With all her rights and appurtenances might sound romantic, but it really means comes with 3 dresses, 2 petticoats, and the faint hope of a healthy son. If you're fortunate, your own family sneaks in a protection or 2, money held in trust, a promise of support if your husband meets an untimely end involving a runaway pig or a suspiciously slippery staircase. Disputes are expected. Breeding contracts come with escape hatches and loopholes. What if there are no children? What if there are too many? What if one of them is born with a peculiar taste in hats? Family elders argue over these clauses for hours, squinting at candles and muttering about bloodlines and God's will. The family solicitor, who hasn't smiled since the Great Scone disaster of 1847, assures everyone that these agreements are binding. Unless, of course, they aren't. If you ever wondered why Victorian marriages looked so joyless in portraits, it's because the honeymoon doesn't start until the contracts end, and the contracts never end. There are amendments for every occasion: births, deaths, unforeseen related incidents. Even if your marriage goes off without a hitch, you'll spend years managing the paper trail, keeping receipts, and ensuring no one's inheritance gets lost in a legal loophole about second cousins or the disputed ownership of the family gravy boat. For some, these contracts are a comfort. Everything is planned, expectations are set, and disaster can be managed with a well-placed wax seal. For others, it's a cage, one with a very detailed inventory list and a strong suggestion to avoid scandal at all costs. Either way, marriage in Victorian England is as much about livestock law as it is about love. Punchline. So, next time you grumble about the terms and conditions on a website, remember the Victorians, who had to negotiate their entire lives by contract. At least your modern agreements don't require you to produce heirs or account for the tragic loss of Aunt Agnes's soup tureen in the event of spontaneous combustion. So, the auction is over. The crowd has dispersed. The last cabbage has been sold. And you, lucky winner of the marriage lottery, have officially become someone's lawful property, lawfully wedded wife. Now what? If you thought the awkwardness ended with the final bid, welcome to your new reality. A life where you're part cherished companion, part household appliance, and entirely responsible for the next generation's teeth and temperament. Your first morning in your new home is a blur of nerves and newness. The house smells faintly of musty curtains, boiled vegetables, and the slightly sour air of compromise. You tiptoe through unfamiliar rooms, careful not to move anything in case it's an heirloom. Red, unidentifiable object that nobody's brave enough to throw away. Your husband, now proud owner of a fine wife, sturdy and dependable, regards you with the same mixture of hope and confusion he gives to his favorite pair of boots. Breakfast is a new experience. You're expected to cook, but in a kitchen with tools that seem more suited for blacksmithing than baking. The salt jar is empty. The bread bin contains only a stale crust, and the family cat watches you with open suspicion. If your porridge is too thin, it's not like mother made, too thick, and you're showing off. This is the fine art of spousal diplomacy, Victorian style. Never excel, never fail, and always remember where the good spoons are hidden. After breakfast, the day unspools in a blur of chores and introductions. You meet neighbors, most of whom seem more interested in inspecting your hands and inquiring after your constitution than in welcoming you to the village. "She looks sturdy, Mrs." Biddle says. "As if you're a new wheelbarrow. Hope she's good with chickens," adds another. You smile politely, wondering if anyone would notice if you slipped out the back door and ran for the hills. But no. Your duty is to stay, to adapt, and above all, to ensure that the family name doesn't slide into obscurity. Or worse, scandal. The reality of being a purchased wife is a peculiar blend of visibility and invisibility. You are, at once, the new centerpiece of the household and also expected to fade quietly into the wallpaper. Your opinions are only valuable if they concern laundry, stews, or the correct method for demudding boots. Any suggestion that things could be done differently is met with polite alarm. "That's not our way," your husband mutters, though he can't explain what our way actually is. Evenings are for quiet reflection, mending, and the occasional bout of homesickness. You write letters to your old family, careful not to mention the drafty windows, the peculiar house noises, or the ever-watchful eyes of the in-laws. Instead, you describe the roses, the sunsets, and your determination to settle in. Some nights, you wonder if you'll ever feel truly at home, or if you'll always be the slightly misplaced puzzle piece in someone else's picture. Yet, with time, routines develop. You find allies among the other wives, learn which neighbor bakes the best bread, and discover secret places in the garden where you can think in peace. Maybe, just maybe, affection grows. Sometimes quietly, sometimes against the odds. Punchline. So the next time you feel awkward at a new job or in a new city, take heart. At least you weren't sold at auction and forced to cook porridge under the supervision of a skeptical cat. Some transitions are tougher than others, but given time, you might just make it home. Every village had one, a book, a ledger, a mysterious volume with cracked leather binding, and a lock that barely worked. This, dear listener, was the infamous breeding registry, the closest thing Victorian England had to a neighborhood yearbook, minus the fun quotes, and with a lot more passive-aggressive handwriting. If you were a woman of marriageable age, your name was probably in it, your prospects, your virtues, and occasionally your tragic failures with scones, all immortalized in ink for future generations to snicker over. The registry lived in the marriage broker's parlor, usually in a place of honor between the family Bible and a decorative bowl of dust. Opening it was a sacred act, part bureaucratic ritual and part village entertainment. It was the sort of book that made grown men nervous, and mothers desperate to see their daughters ranked above the girl who once spilled cider at the harvest dance. Some families treated it with reverence, others with dread, and everyone deep down wanted to know what had been written about them. A typical entry was a masterclass in understatement. Mary Bennett, strong arms, good at mending socks, not fond of geese. Eleanor Pritchard, tall, cheerful, suspiciously fast runner. Anne Cartwright, prone to fits of laughter, unsuitable for life near water. The compliments were sparse, the criticisms sly, and every so often an entry would be brutally honest. Bridget Hill, cannot bake, but makes up for it with unusually pleasant silence. In the era before social media, this was the original public roast. The real comedy, of course, was how seriously everyone took it. The registry was updated with every failed courtship, every successful wedding, every birth, and, occasionally, every suspicious disappearance, often attributed to ill-advised enthusiasm for adventure. Mothers brought bribes of jam or freshly baked bread to the broker in hopes of nudging a daughter up the rankings, while fathers pretended not to care and then snuck peeks when they thought nobody was watching. The registry decided who was in demand, who needed improvement, and who might be left on the shelf with the family heirloom soup tureen. Sometimes, the entries grew downright theatrical. Matilda Green, excellent with livestock, rumored to have opinions. Lucy Hopkins, hair the color of ripe wheat, can outstare a magistrate. For every compliment, there was a counterbalance. Too bold, too quiet, too clever, not clever enough. It was less a breeding registry and more a running commentary on the collective anxiety of an entire population. And yet, despite the dread and the drama, the registry was oddly comforting. It gave the illusion of order, a tidy list, a future you could plan for, or at least gossip about over tea. For some, a good write-up led to a swift match and a new life in a neighboring village. For others, a particularly pointed critique meant years of parlor games and awkward silences at family gatherings. But perhaps the greatest comedy lay in how little it all really mattered. For all the plotting, ranking, and careful record-keeping, love, or something stubbornly like it, had a habit of sneaking in through the back door. Couples paired off for reasons no ledger could predict. Shared jokes, rainy walks, or mutual loathing of the local vicar's sermons. Punchline. So next time you worry about your online profile, remember the Victorian breeding registry, a place where your whole future was written in spidery ink by someone who'd never tasted your biscuits. At least now you can edit your own bio and skip the bit about your run-in with a goose. If you think modern parenting is stressful, just imagine playing a lifelong game of childbearing roulette. Victorian edition. The stakes? Everything. The rules? Mostly rumors, a little science, and a lot of desperate prayer. Here, being a prime specimen doesn't guarantee a safe or simple motherhood. Instead, you're hurled into a world where every pregnancy is a gamble, and the odds are stacked against you by fate, fortune, and the family's ancient superstition about black cats and laundry days. From the moment you're declared marriageable, the expectation is clear: produce heirs, and preferably lots of them. Your mother-in-law counts your cycles more carefully than the family silverware. Every year that passes without a new baby is noted, discussed, and sometimes even prayed about at Sunday service. The village midwife drops hints about herbal tonics, helpful teas, and which root vegetables should never be eaten on a Tuesday. All advice, naturally, comes with a terrifying story about someone who ignored it and paid the ultimate price, usually involving twins and a thunderstorm. Medical science, such as it is, provides little comfort. Doctors have theories, all of them slightly terrifying. Some believe bathing will ruin your chances. Others swear by brisk walks at dawn, and a few still think fainting is a positive sign. The local physician's best advice is often stay cheerful and avoid strong emotions, as if your uterus is connected to your mood, like a Victorian version of Bluetooth. For those with money, there are expensive tonics and special pillows. For the rest, it's folk remedies, dubious advice, and sheer stubborn hope. Pregnancy is never private. Your neighbors, the village midwife, and every female relative within 50 miles feel entitled to inspect, comment, and offer unsolicited guidance. Craving apples? Must be a boy. Suddenly dislike onions? That's a girl, for sure. The ancient art of belly reading, part superstition, part parlor game, turns your body into a public weather report. You learn to smile and nod, secretly making a tally of every prediction just to see who gets it wrong. Labor itself is the ultimate test, a frightening mix of endurance, luck, and community theater. The birthing room fills with women clutching lucky charms, reciting old rhymes, and arguing about whether lavender or rosemary should be burned to drive out bad spirits. The midwife takes charge, armed with experience, towels, and the conviction that yelling louder actually helps. Your only comfort is that every other woman in the room has been here before, or will be soon, and they all know the stakes. Survival is never assured. The risks are real, and everyone knows a story about a neighbor lost to fever, bleeding, or just plain exhaustion. Still, each birth is celebrated as a minor miracle. Gifts arrive, shawls, jam, advice you didn't ask for. If the baby is healthy, you breathe a sigh of relief and brace yourself for the next round. If not, condolences are quietly whispered, and the cycle of hope, anxiety, and superstition begins anew. But through it all, there is resilience, quiet, fierce, and stubborn. Women support each other, passing down real wisdom hidden among the old wives' tales. You share laughter, tears, and occasionally a stiff drink behind the barn, grateful for small mercies and the strength to try again. Punchline. So next time you hear a wild parenting tip, remember the Victorian mothers who survived on a mix of hope, superstition, and herbal tea. Modern parenting might have its challenges, but at least you don't have to avoid rutabagas just to get a good night's sleep. It's one thing to feel nervous about meeting your spouse's expectations. It's another to discover, after the auction and the ink on the contract has dried, that your new husband has a theory. Marriage should come with a refund policy. Welcome to Victorian England, where some men approached matrimony like a trip to the haberdashery. If the goods are faulty, surely there's a return counter somewhere behind the vicar's office. The concept isn't as far-fetched as it should be. Just as a cow might be returned for poor milk yield or a plough for refusing to plough, wives who didn't meet certain expectations, most often a quick and bountiful production of heirs, occasionally found themselves at the center of negotiations for exchange or, at the very least, a partial store credit. You might expect drama, but it's mostly performed in hushed voices behind tightly drawn curtains, with just the occasional loud exclamation when someone accidentally sits on a stray goat. The most common grounds for requesting a refund? Failure to produce children within a socially acceptable time frame. After a few silent winters, gossip begins. Is it her fault? His? The neighbors, not content with minding their own turnips, speculate over the health of your complexion, the regularity of your walks, and the freshness of your baking. If you're the wife in question, you develop a sudden passion for being out of town when the family solicitor comes knocking. Refund attempts range from the vaguely polite to the thoroughly ridiculous. Some husbands return to the auction broker and try to negotiate. I'd like to exchange my wife for one less prone to headaches, if possible. Others appeal to local authorities, only to discover that, despite all appearances, there isn't an actual unsuitable spouse returns policy. This rarely stops them from complaining about it at the pub, or worse, involving their mother. If the original transaction involved a dowry, things get even more complicated. Who gets the goat? Does the family have to return the set of spoons, or just the ones that aren't bent? The resulting arguments are as convoluted as any divorce court, only with more livestock and less sympathy. Sometimes a compromise is reached. The wife returns home, the goods are returned, and the matter is officially never spoken of again, except by everyone, forever, at every future gathering. Not all refunds are literal, of course. Sometimes, husbands simply try to palm you off on a relative. She'd do better on your farm, strong arms, steady temper, and barely cries over burnt bread anymore. In rare cases, a woman is resold, with as much dignity as can be mustered, to a new family seeking a lightly experienced addition to their household. There's a certain absurdity to the process. A farcical cycle of matching, mismatching, and hoping no one notices you're the same woman with a new ribbon in your hair. Through it all, women develop their own strategies. Some become so deliberately inconvenient that no one dares return them for fear of a curse. Others lean into their defective label, finding work, independence, or just a quieter corner of the house where they can read in peace. Punchline. So next time you worry about being returned after a bad first date or a failed casserole, remember the Victorian wives who survived refund negotiations with wit, resilience, and an ever-growing collection of borrowed spoons. At least you're not being bartered for a replacement and a slightly used goat. Although, on certain Mondays, that might not sound so bad. If you think modern breakups are complicated, you've never seen a Victorian divorce, less conscious, uncoupling, more public spectacle with a side of legal mud wrestling. For the rare souls who made it past the marriage market and breeding contracts, only to discover their happily ever after was closer to barely tolerable until Thursday. The drama had just begun. First, let's be clear. Divorce in Victorian England was about as accessible as a unicorn with a law degree. For most, it was simply not an option, too expensive, too scandalous, too likely to end with everyone disinvited from the next 6 decades of family gatherings. For those determined or desperate enough to pursue it, the process was a public ordeal. The law demanded evidence of serious wrongdoing, adultery, cruelty, mysterious disappearances, or the even more serious crime of having opinions. If you couldn't produce a witness, a neighbor's sworn affidavit, or at least a well-documented pie incident, you are out of luck. The courts themselves were theater. Petitioners paraded their grievances in front of judges with mutton chop whiskers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, and a public eager for the latest scandal. Newspapers feasted on every detail, from private letters to incriminating jam stains. Suddenly, your quiet marital misery was town gossip, your secrets spilled in print, and the local vicar writing urgent sermons on the dangers of improper pudding etiquette. For women, divorce was especially dangerous. Winning your freedom often meant losing your reputation, your home, and most of your social circle. A divorcee was whispered about, pitied, or even shunned, unless of course she was spectacularly rich or just spectacularly entertaining. Families chose sides with the seriousness of armies preparing for battle. Cousins who once shared biscuits now glared at each other across parlor rugs. Mutual friends became mutual spies. Petty grievances grew into epic feuds, sometimes lasting generations. One family reportedly fought for 50 years over who got to keep a teapot shaped like a swan, and then there was the paperwork. Mountains of it. Every asset, every promise, every chicken and candlestick was tallied and contested. Who kept the house? The dog? The suspiciously valuable turnip painting? Most settlements were more complex than the marriages they dissolved, and some couples, exhausted by the process, simply decided to stay together out of sheer paperwork fatigue. Of course, the unintended consequences didn't end with the final gavel. Children were shuffled between relatives, sometimes changing last names like hats. Social alliances fractured, dowries vanished, and every future courtship in the family was shadowed by whispers of, "You remember what happened last time?" Sometimes, the whole mess inspired a new genre of cautionary folk songs and parlor jokes. Yet, for all its chaos, the Victorian divorce drama had an odd silver lining. Some women, freed from the shackles of marital misery, found independence in teaching, running boarding houses, or becoming the infamous eccentric aunt. Men, too, sometimes remarried, occasionally to women with stronger opinions and even stronger right hooks. The community learned, in slow and awkward ways, that life didn't actually end with a scandalous separation. Sometimes, it even improved. And occasionally, just occasionally, a runaway wife was last seen eloping with a Methodist preacher and a barrel of pickles, living out her days as the mysterious local legend. If nothing else, the next family reunion had much better stories. Punchline: so the next time you're stressed by a messy breakup or an awkward division of Netflix passwords, remember the Victorians, who turned every divorce into a cross between a legal circus and an amateur theatre production. At least you don't have to fight your neighbor for custody of a swan-shaped teapot. History, if nothing else, is stubborn. But even the Victorian marriage market, full of auctions, contracts, and suspiciously optimistic breeding ledgers, couldn't last forever. The world was changing. Women, tired of being traded for sheep and kitchenware, decided that maybe, just maybe, they'd had enough of being appraised like cabbages at a county fair. And so began the long, slow, gloriously messy road to reform. It started, as so many things do, with quiet rebellion. A few women simply refused to go quietly onto the auction block, opting instead to run away, take up work, or start demanding more from their families than stand up straight and look healthy. Mothers whispered new advice. Marry if you want, but learn to write a stern letter just in case. Spinster aunts, once the butt of family jokes, became sources of secret pride, admired for their independence and impressive hat collections. But reform didn't arrive overnight. And it certainly didn't come without a fight. Change crept in through pamphlets and penny dreadfuls, the rise of female novelists, and the infectious spread of new ideas from across the Atlantic. Activists and suffragettes began to make noise, sometimes literally, as they chained themselves to gates, marched through the mud, or lobbed the occasional pie at a particularly stubborn magistrate. Newspapers debated, politicians blustered, and suddenly everyone had an opinion about the woman question. As if the answer might be hiding behind the aspidistra in the drawing room, the law, ever cautious, tried to keep up. Little by little, reforms crept in. Property rights for married women, easier, if not exactly easy, divorces, better access to education, and the slow, relentless march toward the vote. No longer was a woman's future decided by her father's debts or her mother's skill at exaggerating a dowry. The idea that women could be people, actual individuals, with hopes, ideas, and a burning desire to wear less restrictive underwear, started to catch on. Not everyone welcomed the change. There were protests, editorials with titles like "The End of Civilization as We Know It," and a lot of hand-wringing about who would make the jam if all the women ran off to university. Some men grumbled that marriage was just not the same without the element of livestock negotiation. A few particularly devoted brokers held onto their ledgers and dreamt of the good old days, where a solid handshake and a fine set of teeth could close a deal. But the tide couldn't be turned. As more women gained control over their lives and destinies, the old marriage market withered. Auctions faded into memory. Contracts grew less rigid. The registry, once so important, became a relic, occasionally dusted off for a laugh at family gatherings, or quietly burned in the hearth by an aunt with a sense of humor. Of course, progress wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, scandals, and the inevitable slow pace of change. But the foundation was set. Future generations would not be bought, sold, or inventoried by their breeding value. They could marry for love, or not marry at all. They could study, travel, organize, and agitate for a better world. And occasionally they'd look back, shake their heads, and wonder how anyone ever put up with so much fuss over a dowry, a set of soup spoons, or the width of a girl's hips. Punchline. So next time you sign a contract, remember the women who tore up the old rules, one bold letter, protest, or act of stubbornness at a time. Thanks to them, your biggest negotiation is probably over a Wi-Fi password, not a future of being sold for your jam-making skills. You blink awake, not in a hay-strewn barn or beneath a cloud of cabbage-scented auction anxiety, but in the quiet safety of your own bedroom, the hum of the fan, the gentle glow of your phone, and the utter absence of marriage brokers all tell you the nightmare is over. Victorian England, with its wife auctions and breeding contracts, has finally faded into the rearview mirror of history. But as you pull the covers a little tighter, it's hard not to wonder, what do we actually take away from all that strangeness? besides a strong urge never to trust anyone who carries a ledger. For one, you might feel an odd sense of relief. Your value isn't calculated in cows. Your worth isn't up for public haggling. And nobody's whispering behind lace curtains about the angle of your jaw or the circumference of your ankles. You are, blissfully, the main character in your own story, not a line in a dusty breeding registry. That's progress. Even if it took generations of rebellion, letter writing, and hat-throwing suffragettes to get here. The story of Victorian women, bought, sold, exchanged, and inventoried, reads today like a dark fairy tale written by a committee of accountants with a flair for melodrama. Yet in that odd history, there's a thread of resilience that runs deeper than any dowry chest. These women survived the auction block, the breeding contract, and the nightly roll call of who's delivered the most heirs this quarter. They did it with stubbornness, wit, and a quiet hope that, someday, things would change for the better. Look closely, and you'll find moments of unexpected rebellion tucked between the ledgers and lace. There's the young woman who faked a faint to dodge a terrible suitor, the spinster aunt who became the family's secret legend, the wife who baked terrible bread until her husband suggested she focus on embroidery instead. Every act of defiance, big or small, was a chisel against the stone walls of the old system. Of course, not everyone escaped unscathed. There were heartbreaks, struggles, and more than a few embarrassing pie-related scandals. But even in the thickest fog of tradition, people found ways to laugh, to dream, and, yes, to fall in love on their own terms. The most ridiculous rituals, parading, haggling, ledger scoring, became, in time, punchlines rather than life sentences. Today, we tell these stories not because we long for the good old days, but because we're grateful they're gone. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, wrapped in the quiet freedom of your modern life, maybe spare a thought for the Victorian women who walked so you could run, preferably away from any suspicious-looking auctioneers. They were stubborn, hopeful, and endlessly creative in their quest for autonomy. They proved that even the most entrenched systems can be dismantled, one fainting spell or poorly cooked pudding at a time. Punchline: if you ever wake from a strange dream about being appraised for your jam, making skills, or your childbearing potential, just smile and roll over. You're nobody's livestock. You're the proud survivor of a very weird history, with nothing on your to-do list except being gloriously, comfortably yourself. Sleep well. If you thought modern medical checkups were uncomfortable, Victorian England would truly expand your definition of awkward. In an age before ultrasound, hormone tests, or even reliable thermometers, the local doctor was less family physician and more freelance inspector of breeding stock. Congratulations, your annual exam is about to be part medical, part livestock assessment, and all the way ridiculous. Your mother calls you into the parlor, her voice low and urgent. The doctor is here. Stand up straight. Don't mention your headaches. You smooth your skirt and try to look both robust and humble, two qualities that, according to Victorian medical wisdom, increase your marital value by at least one sheep and a decent slab of cheese. Dr. Flibberty, whose true specialty is treating sheep, colds, and suspicious moles, arrives, satchel in hand, spectacles perched halfway down his nose. He's armed with a tape measure, a battered notebook, and a collection of deeply questionable opinions on female anatomy. You brace yourself as he surveys you, tapping his chin and muttering to himself about good stock and sturdy constitution. The family gathers, silent as a flock of worried hens. The exam begins with a series of highly scientific rituals. Dr. Flibberty pinches your wrist, counts your pulse, or more likely, guesses based on your ability to not faint under scrutiny, and inspects your complexion for any hint of delicacy. He frowns thoughtfully at your ankles, prods your shoulders, and most importantly, stands back to judge your hips, which he regards as the cornerstone of all successful marriage negotiations. Wide? Good. Narrow? We'll see. Symmetrical? Ideal for the continuation of the line. You feel less like a person and more like a finalist at the village livestock show. Medical knowledge, such as it is, revolves around vague theories about humors, balance, and the ever-popular diagnosis of female hysteria. If you're too pale, you need more beef tea. If you're too flushed, less time in the Sunday, a fainting spell can mean anything from excellent breeding potential to dangerously artistic tendencies. There's an odd comfort in the fact that the doctor is just as baffled as everyone else, especially when he prescribes a glass of sherry and a brisk walk as a cure for all known ailments. If your hips and general bearing pass inspection, your mother beams. Doctor says she's as strong as an ox. If not, the family quietly discusses new dietary plans, more eggs, extra porridge, or the mysterious tonic from Aunt Gwendolyn's apothecary that tastes suspiciously like despair and boiled nettles. Any sign of nonconformity, whether intellectual or physical, is treated with polite alarm and swift attempts to correct it before market day. Of course, the doctor's opinion is far from infallible. Half the village is convinced he's blind in one eye. The other half suspects he can't tell a sturdy hip from a saddlebag. Yet his word is gospel, at least until someone's daughter proves him wrong by surviving 10 pregnancies, or, just as often, never needing his professional advice again. Through it all, you learn to nod, smile, and survive the inspection with as much dignity as you can muster. The medical verdict is filed away in the marriage broker's ledger. One more line in the endless inventory of your life. Another hoop jumped, another box ticked, and another day spent as the reluctant star of someone else's medical melodrama. Punchline: so next time your doctor checks your reflexes, be grateful it's not part of your eligibility rating. Victorian medicine, where you're one diagnosis away from being sent home with a new diet, a bottle of dubious tonic, and a reputation as sturdy in the hips, questionable in the ankles. If you've ever worried about a fashion disaster, say, spinach in your teeth or a popped button at a work meeting, spare a thought for the women of Victorian England, for whom wardrobe malfunctions could turn the already surreal ordeal of a marriage auction into a full-blown farce. Here, your future depends as much on the state of your petticoats as on your so-called pleasant disposition. Welcome to the world of corsets, panic, and public humiliation, where nothing ever stays neatly fastened for long. Auction day always starts early and with nerves. You wake in the chilly dark, rummaging through your meager closet for the least stained, least threadbare dress. Your mother fusses, your sisters fight over the last clean hair ribbon, and everyone agrees that, if your best petticoat has a hole, just keep your back to the wind and smile. You squeeze into your corset, a contraption engineered by people who clearly hated breathing, and feel your ribs creak like the deck of a ship in a storm. Corsets are the worst offenders. Laced tight enough to improve your figure, read, make you pass out during the opening bid. They are famous for catastrophic failures at the worst possible moments. One over-enthusiastic tug, and suddenly you're leaking boning like a porcupine. There are legends of girls fainting on the platform, only to be revived with smelling salts and a hasty adjustment, while the auctioneer mutters something about delicate sensibilities and next lot, please. And then there are petticoats, meant to add fullness, but more likely to betray you. They rustle, snag, and, worst of all, slip. A well-timed stumble over a loose hem can reveal more ankle than strictly legal or send a ripple of laughter through the crowd that you'll never live down. Buttons go flying, hooks snap, and safety pins are both salvation and secret shame. If your petticoats collapse entirely, You can always hope for applause. After all, there's nothing Victorians love more than a bit of scandal, as long as it's not their own. Hats are a story all their own. The bigger and fancier, the better. Except when the wind picks up or a nearby goat mistakes your feathered masterpiece for lunch. Veils tangle, ribbons unravel, and flowers wilt with the first nervous sweat. No one dares remove their hat for fear of revealing the wild tangle of hairpins underneath, all holding on by sheer determination and 2 silent prayers. Of course, your family is quick to help, sometimes. Your mother attempts last-minute repairs with a needle, a pin, or, in extreme cases, a strategically placed sprig of lavender. Your sisters offer encouragement, but not their own ribbons. The best solution is solidarity. A whispered warning about a sagging hem, a quick tug to realign your bodice, or a discreet swipe at a chalky smudge on your cheek. Teamwork at its finest. Sometimes, disaster works in your favor. Legend tells of the girl whose corset broke mid-auction. The resulting gasp was so dramatic, she was immediately declared of rare delicacy and high romantic value and swept off the market. Others find that a perfectly timed slip earns sympathy and, occasionally, a more forgiving bid. As the auction ends, you may leave the stage slightly battered, but you leave with your head held high, and with a newfound respect for anyone who can keep 6 layers of clothing from staging a public revolt. Punchline. So the next time you panic over a popped button, remember the Victorians, masters of wardrobe malfunction. At least now, your dignity isn't riding on the tensile strength of 20-year-old corset strings and a borrowed hair ribbon. Of all the strange qualifications paraded through the Victorian marriage market, none was prized, analyzed, or awkwardly discussed quite like virginity. In a world obsessed with breeding value, this singular concept became the most marketable asset of all, trumping strong arms, clever needlework, or even an impressive dowry. Forget swiping right on someone's charming smile. Here, your entire reputation could hinge on whispered assurances that you were as untainted as a brand new tea towel. It starts with the matrimonial advertisements, penned by anxious parents and hopeful brokers. Amid the boasts about good teeth and sound character, there it is. Virtue unquestioned, chaste upbringing, or, for the especially unsubtle, guaranteed pure. It's less of a romantic notion and more like advertising a horse that's never seen a muddy field. Suitors and their mothers pore over these details, treating any uncertainty as if it were a contagious rash. And it's not just in the ads. The vetting process goes full village scale, with every aunt, neighbor, and shopkeeper eager to offer testimony about your innocence. The vicar's wife swears you never looked at a boy for longer than 3 seconds. Your old schoolteacher recalls how you blushed at a suggestive line in Pilgrim's Progress. Even your younger siblings, traitors all, chime in with stories about your lifelong aversion to holding hands. In short, your purity becomes public property, debated as eagerly as the price of winter potatoes. The scrutiny reaches absurd levels. Eyes narrow when you walk with your head too high. Whispers follow you if you're spotted laughing with a neighbor's cousin. The wrong choice of ribbon is dissected for secret meaning. Social gatherings turn into cross-examinations. Did you see the way she refused the 3rd slice of cake? Very virtuous, if you ask me. No one asks you, of course. Your own opinion is as relevant as a lemon at a cheese tasting. If you're one of the lucky few whose virtue is universally acknowledged, congratulations, your stock rises and the bidding is brisk. But if there's even a hint of scandal, an unattended walk in the orchard, a missing glove, a suspiciously poetic diary entry, the whispers grow teeth. Suddenly, you're flighty, dangerously modern, or, worst of all, not quite right for the main family line. No matter the truth, reputation is everything. One false step, and your market value drops faster than yesterday's bread. The irony, of course, is that no one truly knows or, in some cases, even cares what's true. What matters is the story, the village narrative, carefully curated and fiercely defended by your mother's best friend and your second cousin, twice removed. For some, this is a blessing, protection against unwanted attention, or at least a guarantee of a decent offer at auction. For others, it's a prison made of gossip and unasked. For testimonials. Yet, despite the anxiety and the endless surveillance, some women find creative ways to sidestep the pressure. A sudden interest in the church choir, a strategic case of shyness. Even an overzealous embrace of embroidery can convince the village you're not that sort. The result? You earn a badge of virtue, whether or not you ever intended to. Punchline. So the next time you fret about your online dating profile, remember the Victorian women whose worth hinged on a chorus of neighbors vouching for their purity. At least now, you don't need a notarized statement from your childhood piano teacher to prove you're a good catch. Swiping right never sounded so refreshingly private. Forget green juice and protein shakes. If you were a young woman in Victorian England, your diet was less about six-pack abs and more about building a robust constitution. In the marriage market, looking hearty was the goal, and your family would do just about anything to plump you up for auction day. Welcome to the world of the breeder's diet, where every meal is designed to prove you can survive childbirth, a harsh winter, and possibly an unexpected goat attack. It usually starts at breakfast. Your mother eyes you over the porridge pot, her gaze sharp and calculating. Eat up, dear. No one wants a girl who faints at the sight of turnips. You scoop up spoonfuls of thick, lumpy oats, enriched with extra butter, of course. And try not to think about your cousin Sarah, who once got so robust she became the standard against which all other marriageable daughters were judged. Every household has a Sarah, and every girl dreads becoming the next cautionary tale. Mid-morning, your aunts drop by with advice. Bread and dripping will put roses in your cheeks, one declares, while another insists on eggs, the secret to sturdy bones. Someone passes you a tonic that tastes like rainwater and regret, swearing it's guaranteed to increase your prospects. The family cook is enlisted to add extra suet to your puddings. Even your brothers are drafted, instructed to make sure you finish every bite and to tattletale if you so much as push away a crust. By lunchtime, the pressure is on. Roasts, pies, cold cuts, your plate is always heaped, and second helpings are not optional. If you protest, someone will invoke Great Aunt Mabel, who married well after putting on a healthy stone. The kitchen becomes a battleground, you fighting for dignity and a waistline, your family fighting for dowry negotiations. It's less nourish the body and more inflate the investment. Afternoon tea, once a civilized affair, transforms into a test of endurance. Scones, cakes, and jam as thick as family secrets. If you show signs of fullness, your mother frowns. Think of your hips, darling. Good breeding stock needs good padding. You start to wonder if you're being prepared for auction or for hibernation. Supper is the final push. The family gathers to admire your color and note the progress of your appetite. Any sign of pickiness is met with clucking concern. Delicate girls are delicate wives, someone whispers, as if being too slender might be contagious. If you're not careful, you'll find yourself the focus of late-night kitchen snack sessions, where every relative tries to foist another slice of pie or a wedge of cheese upon you. The entire ritual is designed with one goal, to make you look as well set up as possible before the big day. Never mind your actual health. What matters is the village perception that you can weather storms and produce a house full of strong children. Diet books are replaced with family legends, and the only six-pack that matters is the one holding mutton pies. Despite the constant feeding, some women manage to subvert expectations. A clever girl might secretly hide crusts under the table, pass cakes to the family dog, or become a sudden devotee of long walks in the fields. A few famously leaned into the system, becoming so legendary for their robustness that suitors fled in terror, securing a life of blissful, well-fed independence. Punchline: so the next time you count calories, remember the Victorian breeder's diet, where love was measured in inches and matrimony was just another reason to ask for seconds. At least now, you can skip the suet and keep your cake all to yourself. So, the market is over. The crowd has gone home, the last cabbage has been bartered, and the auctioneer is nursing his sore voice with a suspiciously strong mug of cider. But there you are, unsold. No winning bid, no new home, no congratulatory handshake from a neighbor's cousin who thinks your hands are just right for churning. What happens to the leftovers of the Victorian marriage market? As it turns out, being unsold is less tragedy and more unexpected liberation, with just a hint of family panic. At first, there's shock. Your mother cycles through the 5 stages of grief over a single evening, pausing at bargaining long enough to offer you to the baker's apprentice in exchange for a year's worth of sourdough. Your father insists the best apples are always left at the bottom of the barrel, while your siblings alternately tease and console you, depending on who wants your bedroom for themselves. Family strategy meetings follow. Maybe your dress was too faded, your hair too unruly, or perhaps that story about you and the runaway goat has finally made the rounds. Don't worry, your aunt says. There's always next year, or the travelling tinker, or perhaps you'll take up spinning. Everyone has a solution, and most of them involve pretending this never happened. You're urged to be cheerful, dear, as if a sunny disposition alone could bring suitors out of thin air. After the initial crisis, life settles into a new, quieter rhythm. You find unexpected freedom in being unclaimed. No new household to manage, no strange in-laws to impress, no awkward negotiations over the best spot by the fire. Instead, you rejoin the world of spinsters, eccentric aunts, and self-declared women of leisure. It's a life of small joys and private rebellions, extra jam on your toast, reading novels past midnight, and cultivating a mysterious air that keeps the gossips guessing. Being unsold, you soon discover, is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a different sort of legend. The village, which once gossiped about your marriage prospects, now spins tales about your unusual independence. Children whisper that you have magical powers. After all, only a witch could survive so many auctions unscathed. You're called upon to advise other young women, help with matchmaking for a small fee, and occasionally serve as the local authority on everything from pie crusts to local hauntings. A few practicalities remain, of course. You may need to find work, teaching, mending, managing the family accounts, or running a side business that nobody asks too many questions about. You might move in with a relative or take over the family cottage, where you develop a reputation for strong tea and even stronger opinions. No one tells you when to sleep, when to eat, or which ribbons to wear. The only expectations are the ones you set yourself. And sometimes, the real freedom is in the not knowing. With no one to answer to and no contracts to fulfill, your days are your own. A radical idea in a world built on obligation. Maybe you'll find love after all, in your own time and on your own terms. Or maybe you'll be perfectly happy as the village's favorite leftover living proof that a life unsold can be the richest life of all. Punchline. So the next time you feel overlooked, remember the unsold of the Victorian auction block. Women who traded the chaos of marriage for the quiet revolution of self-determination, a second helping of pie, and all the bedtime stories they wanted. Sometimes, being picked last is the luckiest break of all. So tonight, as you slip into your perfectly comfortable unsold bed, surrounded by the gentle hum of your fan, instead of the awkward silence of a Victorian auction block, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. You didn't have to be inspected for sturdy hips. No one's haggling over your marital prospects with 2 sheep and a wheel of questionable cheese. Your biggest worry is probably whether you left the dishwasher running, not whether your family will trade you in for a new set of curtains. The world you just traveled through was absurd, unfair, and sometimes heartbreakingly real. Victorian women, sold as if they were breeding stock, remind us that history is less about romance and more about survival, grit, and the occasional miracle of someone simply refusing to play by the rules. The women who endured this, who schemed, rebelled, or just quietly outlasted everyone, were tougher than we'll ever be, even if their stories mostly ended up as punchlines in some dusty family ledger. But through all the auctions, the contracts, and the relentless matchmaking, there's one thing that stands out: the relentless, ridiculous hope that things could get better. That maybe one day, women would be valued for their minds, their humor, and their wild, stubborn refusal to be anyone's prime specimen. And thanks to those quiet rebels, awkward escape artists, and the occasional eccentric aunt, we're here now, able to marry for love, or not at all, and laugh at the sheer weirdness of what came before. So, as you drift off tonight, be grateful for your clean sheets, your autonomy, and your complete lack of dowry negotiations. Maybe, if you're feeling generous, whisper a little thank you to the ghosts of all those Victorian women who paved the way with wit, endurance, and just enough sarcasm to keep going. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that people, especially women, are resilient, hopeful, and gloriously, hilariously stubborn. Sleep well, and remember, your value was never up for auction. Good night.